We're back. Another edition of Colts Corner with Kevin Bowen. It is our first of many on the offseason front of things. I'll actually come with two podcasts here in the next really like 24 hours. I wasn't really sure exactly when we should begin the offseason podcast, but I figured with the Gus Bradley news / let's just kind of get the Chris Ballard, Shane Steichen returns out of the way. And then tomorrow's pod will come back Wednesday afternoon. We're recording this Tuesday morning with a very Chris Ballard reactionary centric podcast. Eddie Garrison, as always, thank you, sir, and good morning to you.
Good morning to you as well. How's 2025 treating you? I know we're a week in now.
Yeah, I mean, my 2025 is rooted around can the Irish win two more? So that's where I am all about. Thursday night in the Orange Bowl against the Nittany Lions of Penn State. So kids playing in the snow, sledding. It's been great. Hallelujah, they're back to school. Let's go
yeah,
Irish.
I forgot to ask you, are Maddie, or not Maddie, but Max and Rosie Bowen big snow kids?
They are, yes. So we have had a great time in the snow, and looks like it's going to stay for a while. No melting whatsoever, so looking forward to getting back out there. But like I said, today should be a parent holiday of the kids going back to school. I'm picturing parents everywhere cheersing at the bus line as they head back to school. All right, a lot to get to on the podcast, Eddie.
Yep.
The return of Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, the parting of ways of or we don't want Gus Bradley back, however you want to describe it. And then we'll get some Twitter questions. Obviously, tomorrow we'll have a lot of Chris Ballard-centric. Eddie, it'll disappoint, I think, a lot of our listening audience out there. We'll not go with what I liked and what I didn't like. Oh,
really?
From Sunday's win over the Jacksonville Jaguars.
That goes against everything that you believe in.
I know. How about this? Can I recap the game in 30 seconds?
Oh, you're going 30 now? On the rundown, we've got 90, and I was going to start my timer over here when you get going. So in 3, 2, 1.
Jonathan Taylor's good at football. Alec Pierce has had a really good year, probably the Colts' best player. Joe Flacco can still play in the NFL at the age of 40. The defense, what you'd expect, mixed bag. Juju Brent's incredibly unfortunate injury situation, 6 defensive snaps and done. Wow, I can't believe it and I can't believe it all in the same way, which is just sad. Matt Gay and long field goals continue to be an issue, 3 of 9 on the year, and the Colts are drafting 14th overall. How'd I do?
30 seconds.
Hey! What did I miss? Anything?
Oh, you missed Zaire Franklin going up to Pat McAfee's box and giving him a handshake.
He did. How about Zaire Franklin, one of 2 players in the NFL to play every defensive snap this season?
Who was the other?
Some dude for the Panthers. I forget.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. Okay, let's get, unless, you have nothing else to add, right?
No.
Yeah. All right. Chris Ballard, Shane Steichen brought back. Clearly, I've made my thoughts known. Don't need to reiterate that. There is a part of me that just like the earning of a 9th year. I thought back to Kevin Garnett screaming anything is possible on the floor and thought that could be a good Chris Ballard image on Monday morning as he headed back to the Colts complex for a 9th year. I guess we'll just get in the letter, but start here. For Irsay, how much of this is financially driven? Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen are still under contract for several more years. Chris 2, Shane at 4-ish. Chris, I think, handles the Jim Irsay books quite well in Jim Irsay's eyes. Minimal dead cap. I mean, really, they've had virtually no dead cap at all through his tenure. I think Jim Irsay was really turned off by 2013 and 2015 and those free agency pushes from Ryan Grigson that didn't work out and what that did to him financially. Now, again, I can hear people right now listening to this and saying, why should I care about Jim Irsay's finances? Which, very fair statement, but yeah. I'm just kind of stating an opinion out there that I've thought of why is Irsay doing this. Number 2 is he wants to be right. That's probably the scariest thought.
Right on what?
Right on Ballard.
Okay.
I called him the greatest GM hire of the 21st century in the same cycle that had Brandon Beane to the Bills and Brett Veach to the Chiefs and John Lynch to the 49ers. Clearly, that has gone a lot differently than Chris Ballard's tenure here. And then lastly, does he want to run a GM search? That's a big deal. That takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of energy. Is this ownership in a state to do that? This time last year, the answer would be very much a no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think we got a letter to the fans this time last year. It kind of waited. I think like the first, didn't we like have like an Irsay tweet or two like in February? Wasn't like that first time we heard from him in a while?
Yeah.
I'd have to kind of sift through the timeline on all of that. So I guess I'd start there. Letter-wise, Eddie, a lot of it I thought lacked really any sort of substance in terms of the actual why or explanation to fans. I mean, hell, the third sentence, the expectations to win our division and compete for championships. So here's us running it back with the man who's yet to win the worst division in football for a 9th straight year. I thought it was real poor taste. Like this weekend, you got the 10-year anniversary of your last home playoff game, 11-year anniversary of Andrew Luck, Superman against the Chiefs, and Irsay's firing off roof jokes, which I'm not one that maybe is like the most like roof topic person, but I know that really rubs a lot of people the wrong way, considering the taxpayer impact that goes into that stadium. So maybe just like read the room here for a second and realize that a lot of people are pissed off about your franchise right now. Don't think it's time for the tongue-in-cheek roof jokes with a winter storm arriving. He said something to the effect of, just being on the doorstep is not the standard. Are they on the doorstep? I mean, your point differential against playoff teams this year was minus 62. You beat one, and that was a backup quarterback. I've gone over the wins before. Eddie, the 8 wins.
Yep.
6 of them are teams drafting in the top 10. The other 2 were teams that played their backup quarterback or quarterbacks, in Miami's case with Huntley and Boyle.
All by one score as well.
All by one score, I think, is a very good point to make. I believe of the 8 wins, 4 of those wins came against teams that fired their coaches. Titans did not. You got 2 of wins against Brian Callahan, and then again, Mike Tomlin and Mike McDaniel with backup quarterbacks. You haven't beat a halfway decent quarterback in ages. I could go on and on. 26 teams have been in the playoffs since the Colts last have. I just don't agree with the we're on the doorstep. I think you were eliminated from the worst division in the AFC with 3 weeks to go.
Yep.
3 weeks to go. That is a long. You needed, 7-8 game parlay to go your way starting in week 16.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is not on the doorstep. And I bring up point differential. That is a huge
Ballard belief right there.
Ballard belief. Huge. And, I read that from Irsay and think, wow, the goalposts have changed in what you accept or what you considered is successful or acceptable is probably the right word to use.
2 Lombardis this decade, Kev. Don't forget about it.
Yeah, I don't think we got a Super Bowl mentioned at all in that letter. And then lastly, just more than anything, we want to reward you with division titles and playoff runs when we've fallen short in the most painful of ways possible. I think I went over the GM hires, Eddie, on last week's podcast from that 2017 cycle of Bean and Veach and Lynch. And how about if we take out the Chiefs? Let's act like the Chiefs don't even exist. Okay?
Yep.
Because, people could say, hey, that's, it's Mahomes. It doesn't matter who their GM is. I would argue, have you seen their defense? I think they've played pretty good football in the Mahomes era, too. But anyways, if you just want to look at Buffalo and San Francisco, you're talking 7 combined division titles. You're talking 2 Super Bowl appearances. You're talking 12 playoff wins. That's nothing. Average that out. That doesn't even sniff the lack of substance on the Ballard resume. And lastly, before I'll let you interject here, Eddie, I apologize for kind of rambling.
Oh, you're fine.
I thought the random exclamation point might have been my favorite part of the letter. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, wow. We get a voice inflection, so I guess I'll read it like that. But things evolve quickly in the NFL from week to week and season to season, so I will never stop being optimistic that this team can take the next step. 2 things. Is it better to be optimistic or realistic?
Considering the way Jim Irsay has spoken in recent years, my guess he leans more towards the optimism side of things.
Yeah, and I think you have to have leaders that lead rooted in realism. I think it gets very messy very quickly if you lead in optimism. The reality of it is the Colts have finished here in the AFC. Again, 16 teams in the AFC. Under Ballard, they finished 14th, 6th, 10th, 7th, 8th, 15th, 10th, and 9th. And to take it a step further, Eddie, the strength of schedules the Colts have faced in those seasons, this is on the NFL scale, of course, 32 teams. Your strength of schedules have been 26th, 30th, 13th, 29th, 30th, 18th, 28th, and 31st. So you've played in a bad division, and you have routinely had easy schedules.
Not sure if you've seen the opponents for next year, Kevin. It's not going to be an easy one.
No, 3 trips to the West Coast, right, and a trip to Arrowhead.
You got to play both Western divisions, AFC and NFC West. And then who's the random game? I forget.
Falcons, right? NFC South, I think.
Sure. Yeah, maybe.
So, I don't get it. I actually want to give a shout out to listener Kit. He sent in some reasons why Ballard should have been kept, or maybe I should say like positives in the Ballard era. And he sent a ton of them. It was a long question, Eddie. I want to break them up. I don't want to empty it all out here this week. So we'll get to a couple of those during Twitter questions. But I guess my general gist is anytime I hear a reason for why Ballard was kept, none of it has to do with what he has done in the last 8 years. I would say the most common one I hear is you can't do that to Anthony Richardson. So basically that draft pick extended the leash from 3 years.
Yep.
You know, like again, none of it is
and
actual.
Isn't that something we said on this podcast though when the draft pick happened?
Right. That the leash. I'm sure my phrasing. I don't know what my phrasing exactly was, but I'm like the leash has probably been extended for 3 years.
Yeah.
Because again, your first financial decision comes after. Now, again, I don't think that all of a sudden, I don't want this to become you either get quarterback right or you don't. And I guess 2 things stand out to me on that end. Eddie, look at the 14 teams in the playoffs right now. Okay. 11 of them found their quarterback post Andrew Luck retirement.
Yes.
So 11 teams went out there starting in August 2019 when Andrew Luck shocked the world, and they all found their quarterback. I think we got 3 of them, I believe, out of that next draft, right? Herbert,
Love, and Hurts.
And then the other thing I would say is this: the lack of a quarterback doesn't explain the defensive issues. And we'll get to Gus Bradley here in just a second, but he is not the sole issue for that defense. There are certainly some schematic and systematic approaches defensively that need to change, but Chris Ballard has wanted that to be his baby. So I think that is important to reiterate. So much of the Ballard stuff, I feel like I sound like a broken record, so I apologize, but obviously we got some finality, if you will, to the answer for the offseason. Eddie, anything on your end, Irsay related, Ballard, Steichen retention related, that stood out to you before we get to Gus Bradley?
I said it either last week or 2 weeks ago when we started having this conversation when they were eliminated from the playoffs. I just didn't see Jim Irsay making the decision to part ways with Chris because he's tried that before with firing the general manager and keeping the head coach. Fired Ryan Grigson, kept Chuck Pagano. Chuck Pagano was fired immediately the next season. It just does not work in the NFL. And to me, if he fired Chris Ballard, that means he's out on Anthony Richardson. And if you're out on Anthony Richardson, then you fire Shane Steichen too, and then you end up doing whatever you want to do with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, I'm probably not as I certainly understand where you're coming from. I'm probably not as you fire Ballard, that means Richardson is toast. You're still keeping them in the same system theoretically with Steichen. You know, obviously that would depend on who your GM would bring in. Again, this is for our Anthony Richardson centric podcast, which we'll do some point here in the month of January. But you do need to make a substantial move at quarterback this offseason. However you want to define that. If it's Justin Fields, if it's the 44th pick, 50, whatever, you do need to do something. There needs to be kind of a real, not just the Band-Aid 39-year-old backup in Flacco's case. Last thing I'll add on this. As we summarize the Ballard 8 years, let's just live in the 2024 moment for just a second. And some of these goals do extend back beyond 2024. But if we made a goal list at the start of the year, Eddie, you would have the long-term goal of obviously Richardson's development. Mm-hmm. I think we all can agree that development did not continue on the right path.
Yes.
I would argue it has gone down in some critical areas. Continued issues with accuracy, growing issues with accuracy, I think you could say. Anticipation, touch, just general, pinpoint targeting, dartboard, if you will. The turnover numbers have risen.
Yep.
That might be one of the more alarming things of again, you can live with the completion percentage not being very high. You can't live with 2 turnovers every game. And then lastly, the combination of quarterback standard, wearing the captain on the chest, and then durability. Those questions are going nowhere. So again, that's kind of the long-term goal. Now let's shift to short-term goals. Eddie, you were eliminated from the division with 3 weeks to go. You missed the playoffs with a week to go. You're in your longest playoff drought in this franchise's last 30 years. We know the division title drought now is 10 years old. And then let's pinpoint other little things that Irsay has brought up before. What has he brought up before? The inability to win in Jacksonville. The inability to win week 1. The only time we got the Irsay video this year, I mean, we usually get a lot of them, was literally 2 hours before kickoff before Houston. And I went back and watched that video. The entire video is of him talking about week 1. Okay? That streak is still ongoing. It now is a decade plus old. The streak in Jacksonville is now a decade old. This is going to be like the 6th coach that Jacksonville's had since that streak began?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have to list them all, but that is just, even the little goals, the short-term singular game goals, they still did not get completed, checked off, crossed off, however you want to label it. So very head-scratching to me based off resume substance, not head-scratching at all when you consider the words and the words and now the actions of of Jim Irsay towards Chris Ballard.
You've been a big believer in head coach and GM tied at the hip for the longest time. Why is this different to you?
Yeah, I think I largely am. If I'm starting that operation, I largely am. But I think at some point you have got to cut that off. And you have to hold, there was an immediate change phrase that Irsay used. I know fans are upset if it's immediate change. In what way would 8 years of evaluation be immediate change? This is not Gerard Mayo after 1 year.
Yeah.
This is 8 years of evidence. I get it would complicate things. I get that, again, tied at the hip. But, they didn't do that for Pagano and Ballard. They didn't do that for Ballard and Frank Reich and Shane Steichen. So who's to say that all of a sudden you need to adhere to that all of a sudden?
Yeah.
Jim Irsay has had different evaluations for those 2 spots. So why should all of a sudden I agree with that, I guess. Again, I think it's important to have that continuity and symmetry, but it should have been done in 2022.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the simplest way to, and again, it should have been done in 2016. You did not need, but again, Jim Irsay is what? He's an emotionally charged individual.
And a big believer in his people.
And he loved Chuck Pagano.
Yeah.
And again, that is an emotional charge that played into that, even though Chris Ballard wanted no part of Chuck Pagano. So that, that is what I think has to be there from the owner. And I just think you can evaluate all of them individually. Again, I think tying them together is important, but I think they all need to be evaluated individually. And when the biggest reason I hear from people that Chris Ballard should be back is because A, you drafted Anthony Richardson, and B, you need to tie everybody at the hip. To me, that's not enough evidence to bring him back. None of the Ballard answers are because, he's drafted really well at this premium position. Or, hey, did you see the last couple of rookie classes? They're budding. They're emerging. Or, hey, he hasn't gotten quarterback right, but that defense he's invested in, that's been very, none of those answers are in there. Hey, they beat that team. Remember earlier this year, they had that really good win? If they just could replicate that, that's not there. Hey, remember the 2020 whatever season when they won the division? If they could just get back to that, none of those things are there. So that's why I want to individually evaluate them.
The last point I'll bring up that that I've been thinking about as you've been talking is, Kev, let's say you're applying for a manager job, but in this interview process, they tell you, hey, this is your coach, or this is whatever, and then this is your other employee that you have to keep, would that turn you away? Would you be turned off by the fact that Jim Irsay in these interviews is like, yeah, I want you to come here, but your head coach is Shane Steichen.
Right, yeah.
Your quarterback is Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, I know we never really got into that meat of it, but I think I might have said a couple weeks ago, like, if you are going to make a change at GM, you can't force feed that onto those people.
But you would pretty much have to, though, right?
I mean,
at least for year one.
Yes and no. I mean, again, how much autonomy do you want to give the general manager? Which clearly he didn't allow Chris Ballard to do that back in whatever it was, 2017, with Chuck. And then quarterback-wise, you know, I want to be very clear. I think Anthony Richardson should get another crack, and, you know, he needs to have this just massive offseason where, you know, he has a look in the mirror moment every single day. But let me be very clear. He hasn't earned a third season.
No.
So, like, that's where I struggle to say, you know, hey, you know, tying them all together. Yes, you have to do that. Well, sure, like philosophically, you think that you should do that, and it makes sense to do that, but those individual parties haven't earned the outright, like, you 1,000% deserve the starting job next year.
Mm-hmm.
And look, a lot of this is a root of the entire organization. This team specifically has lacked competition in recent years.
100%.
Well, I would make the argument that
complacency is a real thing.
The definition of earning something has been lacking in that building.
Yes.
And I would argue it starts at the top.
Look at Alec Pierce this year.
Look at Alec Pierce.
They draft A.D. Mitchell.
And then a little way, look at Nick Cross. I know that competition wasn't as real as A.D. Mitchell versus Alec Pierce, but like Nick Cross walked into training camp having to answer all these questions.
I think it helped for him.
The starting job. Yeah, but I'm saying it wasn't as direct as like A.D. Mitchell.
Year, he gets the start, right? And then he gets benched and he hardly plays, and then the same thing happens this year. Like, hey, you're the starter. And I think that experience for Nick Cross last year is like, hey, this is my job now, and I've seen it been taken away from me once. I'm not going to let it be taken away from me again.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think that same urgency applies to everyone in that building, i.e. other players and i.e. the top of the organization in terms of the GM. Because he continues to be rewarded for results that, as I've said numerous times, calling it mediocre would be a compliment. I mean, go back, if you just want to sum up one thing, go back and listen to those finishes in the AFC.
Yep.
I'm not going to go over them again, but just go back and listen to them. And then listen to the strength of schedules. Yeah. In this division, that's where you finish in the AFC on an annual basis. Annual basis. I mean, the only reason you made the playoffs in 2020 is because the playoffs expanded. Again, it is shocking when you look at the resume, but of course it's not shocking when you know how Jim Irsay has talked about Chris Ballard.
Where do you want to fit in some post-season talk from the players? Because I think the Buckner comment needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I might sprinkle some of that into Twitter questions.
Okay.
Let's go to Bradley next.
Obviously, the Colts elect, I think the word was parting ways?
Parting ways.
Because you can't, I don't know if you can technically say fired when the said employee is not underneath contract.
I'm sure that makes Gus Bradley wake up feeling much better about himself here on this Tuesday morning. I believe Shane Steichen, the press release, read something to the effect of like, we wanted to move in a different direction defensively. That's probably the nicest way of saying, you know, someone was let go or fired or, you know, in technical terms, I guess, parting of ways. Look, I mean, this time last year, I was asking Chris Ballard, you know, why does Gus Bradley deserve a year 3? So, to me, it was confusing why. He got that, but nonetheless, he did. Improvements were not made. There are issues with Gus Bradley as a defensive coordinator in this day and age of NFL football. The scheme is too stale for modern age. If you need to all of a sudden get your life back on track, you want to see the Colts defense show up on your schedule. That's pretty much how I would summarize the defense under Gus Bradley. Way too many career days for way too many non-star players over the years. I do want to get to some, you know, random candidates here in just a second, but I guess and sometimes I feel this way about the Colts. I'm very confused why Shane Steichen accepted this to be his defensive blueprint. Now, this is Chris Ballard's baby, so maybe this was kind of forced upon him.
Mm-hmm.
But by all accounts, Shane has always been a Gus guy. Their history dating back to the Chargers.
Yep.
But Shane Steichen, one of his core beliefs, like I love Tiger Woods, He loves preparation. I mean, he taught like.
Do you want to redo that?
Like I like Tiger Woods. He loves preparation.
Matty Bowen.
Well, I mean, that's a given. For people that are not listening, of course they know I love my family. They might not know. This might be someone's first time ever listening to the podcast. They might not know that I love Tiger Woods. So I want to make sure that we get that in.
I know. They just want to make sure people also know you love your wife.
Well, thank you. But, I mean, that should, duh. I mean, gosh, she's incredible. The root of Shane Steichen's Anthony Richardson awkward messaging comes down to preparation. He thinks if he tells Brian Dable Friday at 1 o'clock that Anthony Richardson's not playing, that all of a sudden the Giants have a massive competitive advantage over the Colts for that game.
Is there another coach in the NFL that is like him in that regard with the gamesmanship?
Yeah. Again, I don't know, but he obviously is beyond anal about it. So my question is this. If your core belief is preparation, I would argue more than anything else, then why do you have a defense that coaches around the league universally agree you have to prepare? You probably prepare the least for that defense as any in the NFL.
Yeah.
That makes no sense to me. Very confusing. Very confusing on that end.
I remember you talking about just like the aggressive nature and the aggressive play calling and play style of Shane Steichen just doesn't match the laid back, we're going to let you get 5 yards here, 6 yards here. But
that right there, Eddie. If I don't hear bend but don't break again in 2025, I'll consider this year a success. In my opinion, it is such a soft approach to playing defense.
It is.
You are hoping that they make a mistake. You're not dictating to them.
Correct.
You're saying, hey, Drew Lock, if you convert your first 6 passes, we'll give you opportunities, but if you do, all of a sudden, are you injected with some confidence you've never had? And how does that play out the rest of the game?
Mm-hmm. Trevor Lawrence?
I also think it plays into a big field position disadvantage. By bend but don't break, you're content with 30, 40-yard drives, and as long as they don't, end in points, you're celebrating. Sure, that's nice, but it puts your offense at a disadvantage. Now your offense has to go, 85 yards instead of maybe 65 yards.
Yep.
So those are some issues I have, kind of Bradley related. Obviously, they're the worst tackling team in the NFL by far. Now, let me be very clear, and I waited a few minutes before I got here. This is not solely a Gus Bradley issue. This is Chris Ballard's baby. There have been massive defensive investments.
Yes.
I cannot stress that enough. If you look at the draft picks, I believe there's 15 top 5 round draft picks on that defense and a lot of first and second and thirds.
Yeah. Dio, Quiddy, Latu, Brents.
Obviously, you
Cross.
traded a first rounder for Buckner. A lot of resources richly invested into this defense. A lot of money, second contracts, third contracts that have been handed to that personnel as well. You brought back all 11. Chris Ballard fell on the sword last year for the defense. Well, is he falling on the sword tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. again? It just, again, a lot of this just doesn't make sense. So what I would like to see is this. I'd like to see a philosophical change on that side of the ball. I think you have to have some hard questions about some of this personnel. Is this a good defensive coordinator job or not? Let's start there, Eddie.
Ooh. It's a good question. It's a fascinating debate as well because I lean towards no. Do you want to think about your answer or? I don't. No dominant. There's not really a dominant pass rush. You don't have a lockdown corner. You don't have a playmaker. I don't think it would be a very coveted job.
So that's interesting. You immediately went there. I probably would have said.
You've got DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart. That's pretty much, and then you got Zaire. That's about it.
I would say I would be hesitant to take it because it might be a lame duck job.
That too.
Now again, I largely think when we bring up these debates, is your job better than other jobs? Is the Bears' job better than the Jets' job or the Saints' job? I largely think it's 1 of 32.
Right.
Now, I get if you're the Robert Salehs of the world or you're the Mike Vrabels of the world, you might be able to kind of pick. Hey, I've got 3 things sitting in front of me. How am I going to pick? Well, in that case, I do think the Colts could be at a disadvantage.
Yep.
Now, devil's advocate would say this. You have an offensive head coach, so the defense is your baby.
Uh-huh.
Like, you get to do the play calling. It's your side of the ball. Shane's not over your shoulder watching a whole lot. So that all might be good for you. But you also just brought that aspect, which I think is very important to bring up, of like, Eddie, I mean, yeah, EJ Speed's a free agent and Julian Blackman's a free agent, but like this personnel is all under contract and big deals. To get out of those deals would be costly. So how much are you willing to tweak personnel or adjust personnel?
Yep.
I think that is a fascinating question. You know, it's the cycle that involves a lot of big-name defensive coordinators, really. I mean, Saleh is obviously the biggest one, but whether you want to call Matt Eberflus, whether you want to call Dennis Allen, Lou Anarumo, I mean, those are some names that, like,
respected
very well. And, you know, several of them on that list are just kind of failed head coaches. Good defensive coordinators, failed head coaches. So those are the names that I think stand out to a lot of people. Just a couple more to kind of throw your way, Eddie. What about a man that interviewed for this head coaching job 2 years ago?
Dan Campbell?
Campbell was about 7 years ago, but yes, he did interview.
Sorry, I just wanted to keep throwing the jabs out there that they interviewed Dan Campbell.
For the
Aaron
opening.
Glenn?
Aaron Glenn, but of course, I assume he will be a head coach. Wink Martindale.
Back at Michigan.
You want to talk about a man that is a different breed than Gus Bradley, philosophically. I think you'd get a little bit of edginess, little Bruce Arians-ish vibe to
No
that
biscuit, no
sort
biscuit.
of hire. Now, NFC East ties with Shane Steichen.
Very blitzy, too.
Very blitzy. So that's a name that I would have on my list. A couple others, and these are more related to kind of Chris Ballard, Shane Steichen related ties. You got the two Harrises, Chris and Al. Chris Harris was drafted by the Bears when Ballard was a scout there. I think he might even been in the same region. I think he was a Louisiana guy. He is a name that I think people have some respect for. Was with the Titans last year. I thought the Titans defense actually was halfway decent, and the Chargers previous stop, so him and Shane Steichen had some overlap there. Al Harris was with the Chiefs with Ballard. He is now with the Cowboys. And then last name, again, a name that probably people remember more for his college stuff, and I know he was a popular name in the college ranks for a while. He's now with the Broncos. Jim Leonard from Wisconsin. Of course, Ballard has some Wisconsin ties. So, you know, those are just a couple of other names that I wanted to make sure we mentioned, quote unquote, the obvious. You know, Robert Saleh is best friends with Gus Bradley. You know, is he really doing that? I don't. Who knows? And does he want to do it? I guess to that other point there. But more than anything, Eddie, I think you need to be open-minded to a philosophical change on that side of the ball.
I think they need a guy that can provide some energy, like you see with like Robert Saleh, or you see with you see it a little bit with Vance Joseph, like those animated coaches that are defensive guys, to get their players to buy in, to play fast, and to fly over the field. Because at least with Matt Eberflus, that's the one thing that the Colts did do. They were flying all over the field, and now in large part, I think that's because of the leadership of Shaq Leonard and the emotional leadership of Shaq Leonard. Right now, you just don't see that with this Colts defense at all.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. I think in general, and this gets into some of the Buckner stuff from yesterday. I just think you lack a cultural edge, whether that's staff related, whether that's personnel related. I just think you lack it. I mean, like Eddie, you're 8 captains, okay?
Yep.
Besides Richardson, correct me if I'm wrong, all of them have been with you since this playoff drought began 4 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So, 7 of the 8 have experienced this. At some point, like, when do you inject new life into that group? You know, when does some of that messaging need to be different? And I don't think it's ironic at all that the one person who I would say has been most outspoken and candid in the last several weeks, month, is the guy that's played in a Super Bowl.
Yep.
And was arguably the MVP of that Super Bowl until Mahomes took it over in the final 10 minutes.
Is it concerning to you that he came out and like stopped whoever was asking the question, be like ego as part of the issues with the defense this year?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's concerning in that, like, that's the problem, but it shows you. DeForest Buckner doesn't talk just to talk.
No.
Like, when he listens, there's a little bit of a, hey, this is Rafiki on Pride Rock. We all need to pay attention here to what's happening. And that's kind of the feel. Oh, wow, the Titans just fired their GM.
Really?
Yeah, so there you go. That's a little bit of a...
Rand Carthon?
Right. Will Brian Callahan keep his job? So that would be something that I think is necessary as well, to your point, just general energy there.
Kind of makes sense, though, for Tennessee. You get the number 1 pick, so you get a new GM in there to evaluate if they want Shedeur Sanders or trade out or whatever.
You tying everybody to the hip?
That's a good question.
Is Brian Callahan keeping his job?
Excellent question. I mean, as things sit right now, you would think so. There's something else I was going to bring up, but I cannot. Oh, do you have any guesses as to who Buckner was talking about?
Well,
I think everybody has the assumption.
Yeah, I think you start here. Anytime you hear a quote like that about ego and player, first off, I think in a way you could be talking about players and coaches. I don't think you saw a lot of evolvement or exploration to evolve out of Gus Bradley. I mean, they still ranked pretty low in blitz pressure when it was all said and done. I know there are pockets of the season that was different. Certainly you think about individual players that are stat trippy, individual award hungry, however you want to describe it. Okay, who were the free agents this year on that side of the ball? Okay, EJ Speed, Julian Blackmon, Dayo Dangbo. Okay, who won awards, who talked about individual accolades? Zaire Franklin.
Yep.
Would be that. So those are the names that certainly kind of pop into my head immediately on that. So again, these are continued questions that you have organizationally that's just not related to Anthony Richardson.
Kev, you have anything else to add here before we get into Twitter questions?
I don't. I think we got a lot to get to in Twitter questions, so let's go ahead and hop in there.
We will start with Daniel. What is there to look forward to next season now that everything is going to stay the same? All I can see is another 7 or 8 win season. It just feels like we've suffered through the disasters of the Broncos and the Giants games for nothing.
Well, I guess I'd start here. What change is being demanded, if any? Okay, Gus Bradley lost his job, right?
Yep.
What change is being demanded? Is Chris Ballard being required to change some of his approaches?
Titans are keeping Brian Callahan, by the way.
Look at that. Okay, so they did what I think many people wanted the Colts to do, right? I'd have to go back and look at my poll, but I think there were a decent amount of people, I think over half, right? Said that they just wanted Ballard fired. So I guess I would start there. Now, what about cutting guys? What about taking bigger swings in free agency? Do you feel the need to make a big quarterback swing? I've referenced this a lot in supporting your young quarterback, but what Stephon Diggs did for an early Josh Allen, I think when healthy, I know the Tyreek Hill thing hasn't gone maybe great, but I still think when healthy, I mean, the Dolphins have gotten to the playoffs. And then what A.J. Brown, did for Jalen Hurts and has done, that stands out.
Go get Tyreek.
So, if any, what big changes are there? Because right now, when you say, hey, what's your 2025 optimism? I mean, there's nothing that you can point to.
Well, Kevin, don't you know that Anthony Richardson is going to have a quote-unquote healthy offseason to where he can refine his mechanics and work on all sorts of things and get together with his receivers. And we just look forward to next season with Anthony hopefully developing into the franchise quarterback that we envision him to be.
And let's go to Richardson for a second. And I know you're a little tongue-in-cheek with that, but he is the outlier in all of this. But let's play out Hollywood here, if you want to. Let's say Anthony Richardson starts throwing the ball like Greg Maddux. Let's say he starts protecting that like, you protect the engagement ring. And let's say he starts winning the frickin' Trester Award for mental attitude.
Yeah.
Let's say all those things happen. Whatever that parlay looks like, whatever that 3-game hit is that you need to have, and you're confident on a Saturday morning as you watch, Stanford Steve tell you on College Game Day what you should do. If that hits, we still have the question of, can he stay healthy?
Yep.
Like, even if you hit accuracy and protects the football better and, again, becomes this, poster child for, how you want to act and, captain and quarterback and whatever the hell that looks like, 17 to 34 games he's missed due to injury. So, like, yeah, that's the toughest part. Like, if you want to be optimistic about Richardson, if you want to sit here and say, hey, he deserves a healthy offseason.
Yeah.
And I think he does deserve that. I mean, and, it doesn't sound like this back injury is going to be too severe. But even if you check all those boxes, you still have the availability question in all of this. So, to Daniel's point, where is there to look forward? I would say this. We're still living in the venom, I think, for a lot of people of the decision that Jim Irsay made. Again, I did a poll. It was a little less than 8,000 people. Only 5% agreed with Irsay. Okay, if you base that poll, 95% of people are, pissed off, okay? At some point, and we'll do this eventually on the podcast. I don't think the first offseason podcast of the year qualifies for it. But at some point, the shift will be the people are back. What is changing?
Yeah.
Are they all of a sudden, I've thought too often with Ballard, he's walked into Jim Irsay's office with the same binder he walked in with January 2017, and the binders added no new tabs.
Yeah.
Or remove tabs. It's been a stubborn, I go back to the COVID press conference. I'll never forget this. We were inside the indoor facility at the Colts complex, Eddie. It was a season-ending press conference. They had us kind of spaced out in chairs. And I asked Chris, have you thought about changing or altering your roster building approach? And he gave me that's a good question. It's something that I have thought long and hard about and need to continue to do. Again, that was January 2021. I would argue that question is still perfectly acceptable when we meet him
tomorrow
in less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
So that, I think, that's to Daniel's point of okay, Steichen back, okay, Ballard, but is the defensive approach changing? Is the approach to free agency changing?
Uh-huh.
Is Shane Steichen's leading as a head coach changing?
That has to change, by the way.
Right. But again, these are all things that you would point to as things that need to change. Again, I don't think that conversation on January 7th is necessary. We got 8 months before it gets real, people. But those are the questions that need to start happening.
By the way, you mentioned the availability and the health aspect of Anthony. Last week I mentioned the S word. And I don't think people fully grasp what I was saying. They thought I was referring to physically soft with Anthony. I was more so referencing the mental aspect of it. It even kind of started and dates back to me really in the preseason and OTAs and training camp where he shut down for a couple of days because of shoulder soreness coming off the shoulder surgery. We played it off at the time, and then you have the tap out incident, and then you've got Michael Pittman Jr. out here with a fractured back playing, and you've got Julian Blackman playing through a torn labrum, and then there's Anthony. I just don't know what the mental makeup is of Anthony. And when you hear Shane Steichen in the past talk about Phillip Rivers, talk about Jalen Hurts, talk about Justin Herbert, he references the mental aspect of all of these guys and mental capacity, mental strength, or whatever, their preparation. But we haven't heard that once with Anthony yet. It's all about the physical tools of, hey, he's a very, very physical runner. He's got a great arm. He just needs to work on the mechanics and the accuracy and the touch. We don't hear anything about the mental preparation and the mental part of the game of playing quarterback with him.
Yeah, I guess to go back down that path again, I think in no way, shape, or form do I think Anthony Richardson is a soft football player. The mental component is certainly something different. Mentally, he certainly needs growth. I guess I would start there. I do think there are some aspects that he's shown that you could be optimistic about. I think he's shown unbelievable poise when the game's on the line. Yep. I think that is a mental component that is really hard to teach, and he's been successful with.
I agree with you there.
It's like a little thing, but I noticed this. Was it Jets into Patriots? Yeah, Jets game was first, right? And Patriots was a couple weeks later?
Yes.
So the Jets game, he scores a touchdown and he celebrates it. He forgets they got to go for two. Patriots game, he throws it to Pierce, and he immediately just stays back in the huddle, doesn't celebrate at all, knowing that they're going for two. Again, that's mental growth. That is hey, that's a guy that clearly admitted after the game, I was way too celebratory, and I need to learn from that. Okay, 2 weeks later, he's learned. Now, again, there are a ton of layers to learning off the field that are not just how you celebrate a touchdown or not. But like those are some areas where, mentally maturation must occur. To me, soft is a very, very big word to use.
And like I said last week, I just don't know what other word to use, because there's not really another synonym for it that's not
immature. Some might say
it.
They are synonyms.
Yeah.
Some might say it sounds just as bad, if you will. Again, he needs growth. And the difficulty in that, Eddie, is like that growth is hard to see. It's like, A, how do you know? B, how do you see it? And I think that's a huge offseason question. How do you monitor that if he's in Florida?
Yeah. How do
you if you had issues when the dangling carrot was playing football on Sunday, are you going to have issues when the dangling carrot isn't coming for 8 months? Yeah. Right? I mean, seriously. I mean, it's just a different grind.
Back to the Twitter questions with Cameron's. Ballard's insistence on sitting out free agency and exclusively building through the draft means this team rarely ever has guys that have gone deep into the playoffs or have come from a winning culture. That has to have a huge impact on the locker room. Yeah. 8 years in, and Ballard can't see his approach only brings mediocrity.
Thank you, Cameron, for the question. I think another thing with his general approach of being so gung-ho about the draft, first off, the draft is a crapshoot. Secondly, whether you want to admit it or not, the human instinct is there of you want to bet on your guys that you took. You want to bet on those traits. You want to say, hey, coaching staff, figure it out.
Kind of like with Irsay being adamant on being right.
Very similar. And look, this is not just a Chris Ballard issue. Ryan Grigson, I thought, in holding on to whatever, Bjorn Werner or Trent Richardson, however you want to look at it. Like, you want to be right. Go back to the defense. Make the list of the first and the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth round picks on that side of the ball. You want to believe. You want to be right. I thought the examples we touched on earlier in the pod, Eddie, are spot on of just what Alec Pierce. I'll never forget Alec with a slight smirk in June when he was asked about the drafting of A.D. Mitchell outside following an OTA. And again, Alec is a man of few words, but like, it's almost like he looked around like, am I allowed to say it? It motivated me? Or is that like a little bit out of character for me? We're all human beings. We're all like, and these are the utmost competitors in terms of being a human being. Competition is going to bring something out of you, good or bad.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't always have to be good, but at least you get answers. Whereas you hand people things. And I thought it was rather stunning that the 29th ranked, or 28th, whatever it was, ranked defense in scoring last year returned all 11 starters.
Yeah.
And Raekwon Davis was it. And you draft Latu. It's not like they were planning on drafting Latu. And then
best defensive player in the draft.
So it just, I get that the roots of your roster building want to be through the draft. I understand that, but I think the ignoring of other avenues to supplement your roster significantly and not so significantly can be beneficial. Remember our safety debate earlier in the year?
Yes.
I said to you many times, I don't necessarily need Justin Simmons, but where's Rodney McLeod? Where's Mike Mitchell? Where's Mike Adams? TJ Carey even at corner. Like, just a single or a double two. Julian Blackmon tore his labrum in week 1. He missed 1 game, and then he missed 2 snaps the rest of the season. Why? Because you had no one else to turn to. What if Julian Blackmon could have rested that up for a month? What could that have looked like late in the season?
Yeah.
Instead, Julian Blackmon's making plays out there that people are calling him out for, and I get it. But, again, you have no one else to turn to at safety, so he feels the need that he's got to play through that.
The other aspect of it, too, from Julian's perspective, there's the track record of injury and missing time.
Right.
Contract year,
again,
I have to go out there and play through this.
We did this quite often back in August. Eddie, it was 4 layers in the secondary. 1, are your corners good? 2, are your safeties good? And, mainly kind of cross, I would say, would be the guy at safety. At corner, it was more of like, again, Jalen Jones, then whatever you end up doing at corner. And then you also had, can Juju Brent stay healthy and can Julian Blackmon stay healthy? Those are all 4 layers. And certainly, you needed all 4 of them to be right. Yeah. And that, again, that's a parlay that I don't want to try and hit. And sadly, you missed on it, in week 1 with Juju going down.
Yeah.
And Blackmon got hurt in the same game, ironically enough.
Roberto's question is next. Hey, Kev, I have a question for the podcast. Could you and Eddie name 3 good reasons so the Colts organization should give another opportunity to Chris Ballard and company? Greetings from Torreon, Mexico.
Oh.
Happy New Year and go Colts, even if they win.
Feliz años? Feliz nueve años?
Happy New Year.
Feliz años nuevo. I think might be right. God, I butchered that. That was horrible.
Yeah, you butchered your post on Instagram the other day where you said 2 pesos because pesos does not equal dollars.
Did I butcher that?
Yeah.
People seem to like that. I feel like I always say dos pesos.
I think that's equal to $1 American dollar.
Yeah, I should know that. I actually been to Mexico not super recently, but whatever, the last handful of years. Could you and Eddie name 3 good reasons the Colts organization give another opportunity? I'll start, and I guess you've already said it. You provide a stable-ish environment for Anthony Richardson still to be in?
Yeah.
Is that one?
Yeah.
You want to popcorn this up? You want to go back and forth? You want me to name 3? You name 3? I don't know if we can name 6.
It allows Jim Irsay to continue to focus on his health to get better.
And I would argue it helps Jim Irsay to feel good financially. That would be kind of the other avenue. Roberto, I don't know if I said it on last week's podcast, but I was half seriously with my statement, half joking. Eddie, if you and I had the debate project and Mrs. Jones said to us, okay, one of you gets to debate Chris Ballard should get a 9th year and the other one gets to debate he should be fired, I'd wrestle you.
Oh, I figured you would.
For the debate of he should be fired. I want no part. What would your poster board look like? I'd be faking COVID if I had it. I mean, seriously, I don't say I say it tongue-in-cheek, but I don't really say it tongue-in-cheek. I don't know. And when the Colts make decisions, one thing I try to do is, okay, opinion, and then remove yourself from the opinion.
Yeah.
It's fine to have the opinion, but I also want to make sure of, okay, let me put that hat on. Irsay hat, Ballard hat, Steichen hat, whatever hat I need to put on, and the why. I go back to Steichen wanting this defense or being content with Gus Bradley. The why confuses me. Emotionally remove it, and now say, okay, Steichen, why? You love to prepare more than I love Doritos and cheese and bacon. Like what? So
and
again,
Matty Bowen.
Yes, of course.
Reese's.
And then I do love Reese's. Right here, right now, Eddie, the why on Roberto asked a terrific question. 3 good reasons. I said Richardson returned to a established environment. You says it helps Irsay financial or health wise, and I threw out financially. I guess if I had to throw one more, if you want to retain most of this core, here you go. Is that a positive? If you want and again, I'm just throwing out names, and we'll see how everything plays out, but the Taylor, Pittman, Nelson, I guess Ryan Kelly and Braden Smith are very undecided. Buckner, Stewart, Zaire, Kenny Moore. If you want that core to stay intact and have another crack at it, here you go. That would be another positive, I guess you'd throw in there.
Another positive for me, and I think it's a little bit of an ironic one, is we talk about how much he's invested in the defense. He's actually been pretty good on the offensive selections. You look at it. Ryman, Pittman, Pierce. I still have confidence in A.D. Mitchell.
Well, I mean,
Taylor.
Yeah.
The only real spot on his resume on the offensive picks has been tight end.
Yeah, I would say early offense, and some might argue you didn't try enough offensively. His first 3 3 picks were all defense, right?
Did he pick Smith? Braden too?
He did big Braden Smith. People point to Paris Campbell a lot. In those first 3 years, you drafted 3 wideouts.
Yeah.
They were Paris Campbell, Reese Fountain, and Deion Kane.
Yeah.
Some would say, A, you need to draft more wideouts, or B, obviously don't draft those wideouts.
Yeah, I was about to say, now look at the Josh Downs.
Sure.
Look at the last
Downs,
4 he's drafted.
Yeah. I would say, you could say, yeah, okay, we could throw that on the list. So, yeah.
I know I only gave 2, you only gave 2, but we've laid out pretty much all the other ones throughout the pod leading up to this moment.
Well, and I would argue, Eddie, I don't think we could go much longer. I mean, we are really stressing. I'm half joking, half serious. The Colts have behaved pretty well off the field under Ballard.
Well, you had the Isaiah McKenzie and Tony Brown situation
But
last year.
again, that was internal for the most part.
I'm forgetting his name. Isaiah Rodgers getting suspended.
Right. I mean, you obviously have had issue, but I'm like, okay, I'm talking like legal, like arrest. I mean, there are guys that get arrested around and again, some say, I don't care about that. And others would say, whatever, but like, this is a problem.
The only
when I legitimately
Ogletree.
Yeah, and those charges were dropped. When literally we get to a list of 4 or 5 pros to keep Chris Ballard, and I'm going to arrest record for the football team, that's not, I think, what you want.
Moving on to Clayton's question. When the Colts drafted Anthony Richardson, everyone knew he was a project. Everyone. So now, 15 starts in, it seems like they want to give up. Do you think that the team, Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, are not being as patient as they should with the Richardson aspect of this because other areas of the team also aren't performing as they should, whether that's offensive line, defensive line, linebackers? For example, if the Colts finished 8-9 and the offensive line and defensive line played well, would the Colts be more willing to be patient with Anthony Richardson? I feel like because of the failures in other areas of the team, whether it's poor play or just simply not enough talent, that the team is trying to force Richardson to develop faster than he should. I think this is an excellent point by Clayton.
Yeah, I guess I largely think this to the last point, like there. Anthony Richardson should be on a trajectory that is starting to improve. I said at the start of the year, 6 questions for the Colts that we need to get by the end of the year. The Richardson question was, you want to get to the end of year 2 and say, hey, when you need to pay him and start to pay him more, which again, we're about 18 months away from that first decision. It'll happen after next season, so we're 17 games away from it, if you will. You want to be in a position where you say, yes, we would like to pay him more. I mean, there's no way anybody sits there and says right now, yes, we'd like to pay him more.
Right.
Now, again, that doesn't mean he's a bust and you should be done with him and all that, but like right now, I don't say that. It's kind of a little thing, Eddie. I'd be very open to some offensive changes. Staff.
Yeah? Like what?
Who did Andrew Luck have on his offensive staff when he walked into the NFL? And by the way, that is Andrew Luck. Do you remember his offensive coordinator? Do you remember his quarterback's coach?
Pep Hamilton?
Pep Hamilton came after this man got a head coaching job in Arizona.
Bruce Arians.
Bruce Arians and Clyde Christensen. Those were very well thought of, very long tenured offensive staff members for Andrew Luck. Anthony Richardson walked into an offense that had one of the most inexperienced staffs I had seen. I found that, like, defensively, the Colts actually had a somewhat experienced staff. Offensively, they were incredibly inexperienced. So I asked this, do you need the voice? Like, Shane Steichen loves to spend time with Anthony Richardson. Loves it. Loves it, loves it, loves it. Again, it's a tough balance that he has. You've got one of the biggest projects the NFL's seen, and you're also the head coach of the football team. Good luck weighing that. No wonder the man is so crazy about time and all of that. But given that, what if you had different, stronger, challenging voices in the OC or the quarterback's coach?
Yeah.
I think those are some things that need to be explored. So to Clayton's point, there are clearly issues around Anthony Richardson. But at the same time, like, how would I summarize the offensive play this season? Offensive line play this season.
B?
Yeah.
Considering all the injuries they endured through the season.
So given that is a B, like CJ Stroud's got what, a D- in front of him? So like, okay, if that's a B, I would have liked to have seen Anthony Richardson, I would say at the very least, stay where he was last year. But again, we had noticeable regression in accuracy.
I thought the pass game concepts were a complete 180 from last year too.
Yeah, you lacked hitting big plays, which was very confusing. Because I didn't think it was because Anthony Richardson was missing the deep shots. I didn't think they really took as many with Richardson. Yeah. Seemingly with Flacco, they actually took a few more. At least that's how it felt. I don't know if the stats would back that up. So I would say this. It's just the year 1 to 2 regression. Like, you wanted to see strides to throw. Like, Eddie, he was a 10% better thrower in training camp this year than he was last year. and yet he was a 10% worse thrower in the game.
I think that's more indicative on the Colts secondary than anything else.
Well, that is a good point. But yes, but I think there's more there. Like, okay, he was, just look at his rookie example. He actually threw it just as well in the games as he did in training camp practice. Obviously, He's not facing the Colts secondary in games. And maybe I'm making too much out of 173 rookie snaps, but that's the sample size we had to go off of. So, Again, Clayton, I get where you're coming from. I thought it was always kind of like a 3-year process. But again, right now, evaluated on January 7th, 2025, the arrow's not where you want it to be.
You alluded to this question earlier in the pod. This is from Kit. Can't wait to hear your pod tomorrow. I'm sure you hit on a lot of these points. But Kit wanted to throw this out there for you, Kev, to chew on for a little counter perspective. In defense of Chris Ballard and the run-it-back approach, number one, he had whiffed big time on pass rush his whole tenure, but I believe it is one of the hardest positions to get right, and a lot of teams miss out on that position. He has taken a lot of swings, but hasn't found the marquee guy yet. He does deserve a lot of credit for what he's done in the draft at other positions. A ton of great finds up and down the draft all over the roster. Another point that Kit brings up, Anthony Richardson was always a project and was going to need 3 years. Injuries have slowed that down, and we need to see a big improvement over this healthy offense offseason. He's definitely shown flashes, and I am optimistic. It makes the most sense to tie GM, head coach, quarterback together for this next season and give them a healthy offseason before the time runs out on this kid. I expect one big year deal to come this season to support him as well. I know this is a lot, but I just wanted to give a little more nuanced option to the contrary. Feel free to chop it up or just throw this out. Love what you're doing.
Kit, thank you. We will chop it up. We have chopped it up. We'll continue to get to some of your other points. I guess I want to start here, Eddie. I love our listeners. When we started this podcast, whatever it was, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, I wanted to make sure that every podcast had about half of it related to Twitter questions, because I think, A, I think the listeners should have a voice, and B, I think there are a lot of very, very intelligent people out there that either agree with you or disagree with you or want to bring up counterpoints. And I think that is so refreshing. I think it's so necessary. I don't think our culture, frankly, does enough of that, if I can get on my soapbox for 6 seconds and move on. But just living in the here and now of little Colts Corner with Kevin Bowen and Eddie Garrison, I like this stuff. So thank you, Kit. I think it's really important to do, and I'm glad that we'll be able to address it today on the pod, and then I don't know if maybe tomorrow is the best time to do it, but we'll do it on future offseason pods. So let's start with the defensive line point, Eddie. I'd have to look this up, but I would argue there's no defensive line in football that has more invested into it in combination of draft picks, premium draft picks, plus money.
Yep.
First, second, third, fourth, et cetera, and money. I believe the Colts were 25th last year in sack percentage. They, in the Chris Ballard era, that is 8 years. The only double-digit sacker is Justin Houston, 2019 season. If that sounds right. I looked this up the other day. The NFL has seen 87 guys. So league-wide, 87, what does that average to? About 3 a team, a little less than 3 a team. 87 guys have a double-digit sack season since the Colts have last had one. So, to me, the serious, quality, high-resource investment into that group has not led to strong individuals at the level that I think is important to have. Because when you have that type of player, now you stress an offense. Now you open up avenues for other people, especially off the edge.
Yeah.
When you can do that and you all of a sudden say, hey, you might need to keep that skill player in there. So now that tight end doesn't leak out and catches it 4 yards over the middle of the field like they always do against the Colts and run for 12. So again, Basham, Banigou, Toure, they just were a big bust. You would never think about giving second contracts to those guys. Toure maybe had a flash or two if you really want to nitpick things. And I continue to say this. I think Kwity Paye is just a guy. If you look at Quiddy as an edge rusher, if you look at a season, 48th in pressures, 47th in tackles for losses, and 74th in quarterback hits. To me, those stats indicate more of a consistent player, a consistent disruptive player. It's not like sacks. I think we can fall into kind of the end all be all. Sacks, I forget what he ended up with, 8 or 9 this season. But you talk about consistent presence. I don't see it there. And then I would just say lastly on the draft, let's go position by position, Eddie. I would argue the Jonathan Taylor draft pick at running back immediately qualifies as running back has been an absolute hit. I would like to see other running back moves, but like I think Nyheim Hines is a really quality player.
Yeah.
So I would say running back's a hit. I'd say offensive line has largely been a hit. If you're scraping for positives, I thought Tanner Bortolini, Matt Gonzalez, they didn't look deer in headlights when they were out there.
Correct.
So I'd say offensive line's a hit.
Dalton Tucker.
You're right. Yeah, I mean, even if you want to get a little bit deeper into the weeds. Defensive tackle with Grover Stewart, certainly I think will qualify. And linebacker has been outstanding. I mean, I cannot stress that enough. Linebacker has been just an absolute home run. I would say wide receiver is starting to trend positively, but I can't say it's been good just yet. Again, I think it's on the right arrow, but no. Tight end is certainly a no. Defensive end is an obvious no. Cornerback is an obvious no, and safety is probably a bit of a mixed bag. So I guess anything related to D end or D line or just general draft. I mean, I think draft, like considering the hit rate, I think it's largely been like if you said, is he a good drafter or a bad drafter? If you only allowed me those two choices, I'd say good. But I also think the draft is really, really difficult to be that reliant on.
Yeah.
Which probably weighs into my good. So anything on Kit's first point with the draft. I would strongly disagree on defensive line. And I know he argues that it's difficult to find those guys, but again,
you've drafted every type of edge rusher now between Latu and Quiddy Pay.
Every shape and size of it. It's not like that hasn't been for a lack of resources. Like you could make the argument, at quarterback for a while, he just never took a swing. He took swings and he continues to take swings at defensive line and edge rusher. So if you invest that much into your D line, draft and money, you need it to be a better unit.
Like I said earlier, I think he's been really good with the offensive selections. I think A.D. Mitchell gets criticized a little too much when you look at more like the analytical things that
we're gonna have to do an AD segment at some point.
Part of AD's season, I think he gets ridiculed a little too much because I think there's a perception about him that I don't think is fully accurate. And then, like you said with Taylor, I mean, he's been really in all the other positions, but of course, he's got to get quarterback right. That's the one position where you can't afford to be wrong on when you do select it. What about a second point? You have anything to add on that one?
I would say this. Richardson, the last part on Richardson is the biggest reason for retention.
Yes.
And I think we've kind of said that throughout the podcast of like, okay, keeping it stable for him, et cetera, et cetera. That is you don't want him learning a new scheme. That's the biggest reason for retention. But like, this kind of goes back to the overall debate we've had throughout this podcast of what are the positive reasons for keeping Chris Ballard. None of it is due to the resume.
Yep.
Again, none of it is due to remember this. It's never like Chris Ballard is good at being a GM in the sense of, hey, you've got budding draft picks here. Hey, you had that one season boom here. Hey, his massive defensive overall has worked. Like, no, none of it has. So that's where I just struggle in that. So yeah, Kit, I appreciate it. Thank you times a million. And yeah, I feel like that's pretty much everything that I wanted to say.
Final question is from Alex, Penn State alum here.
Can I add one more thing?
Yep.
And this is a little bit more Irsay related than anything, Eddie.
Yeah.
But I think what you want, people in positions of authority that lead, that make big decisions. I think you want those people to accept or admit that they live in a world of reality. I think that's largely what you want.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, did you watch the Jim Irsay post-game locker room scene from Sunday?
The video that you tweeted?
No, the one of him actually in the locker room.
I did not.
Celebrating the Colts win.
I didn't even see it.
Yeah, he handed out a couple game balls, et cetera, et cetera. He says something in there of like, hey, we're 1-0 in 2025. And while certainly there's no more of a dad joke than making New Year's jokes like a week into the new year, like that is the poster child. I mean, hell, I've done it way too many times in the last week. The fact that he said that, like, oh, wait, he really thinks that. Like, he really thinks that the overtime win over the Jacksonville Jaguars missing half of their captains is, like, meaningful.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is scary. Like, this kind of gets back to, like, oh, my gosh, that can't be how you view this season or that game at all.
Final question is from Alex, Penn State alum here, and Notre Dame's defense scares me. Are you more nervous for Penn State than you were for Georgia as a Notre Dame fan? No secret, but watch defensive end Abdul Carter, number 11. He is freaky. Micah Parsons good.
Here we go. Thursday night, Eddie. Abdul Carter, is he playing?
I hope, because the first time I watched him play, of course he wears number 11, so I immediately thought of Micah Parsons. Like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like a clone.
I can't wait. I am a little confident about this game, I will say. I am, but I do worry about Notre Dame's overall health. Jeremiah Love got injured again against Georgia. What does he look like? He's a guy that needs to be 100%, really. Tyler Warren's a stud. I know Colts fans want him badly. The matchup with him and Xavier Watts, I think, could be tremendous. Xavier Watts, number 0, the one who picked off Curtis Rourke early in that game for IU fans out there.
Hell, I want both those guys.
Yeah, Watts is a hell of a football player. He makes plays at every level. And the thing about Warren that's difficult is now you almost take Watts away from maybe making plays at the line of scrimmage because you need him on Warren. And they obviously move Warren all over the field. Tom Allen's done a hell of a job, in all seriousness, with Penn State's defense. I think an underrated aspect of Penn State is their ability to run it. Singleton and Allen, I think, are a great duo. I think they'll be a little bit more committed to trying to kind of hold Notre Dame to that 60-minute run on a short week standard. I think that is something to also toss in there. I think Notre Dame will win the game, but, I mean, to put it in Colts terms, Notre Dame right now is dealing with injuries of no Bernard Ryman, no Ryan Kelly, no DeForest Buckner, no Samson Ebukam, no Kwity Paye, and we'll see about their Jonathan Taylor. I mean, that's how banged up they've, and it's a major credit to Marcus Freeman. You know, the thing about when they fired Brian Kelly, when Brian Kelly stabbed Notre Dame in the back, where I found optimism was I think Marcus Freeman will have the ability to create a roster with more depth. I'll never forget Notre Dame played Clemson in the playoff game a handful of years ago. Notre Dame, Clemson, I think it was like 0-0 or 3-0 at the end of the first quarter. Julian Love, who's turned out to be a really nice NFL player, he gets hurt early in the second quarter, and I literally am like, oh, there goes the game. Well, sure enough, I think they threw 3 straight touchdowns to the guy behind Julian Love. Like, Notre Dame lacked depth. Now, I think they have created a roster where they can withstand some of the, I mean, that's some serious attrition, and I think it's a credit to Marcus Freeman and the overall ability to recruit a roster that, again, has more depth. Certainly their coordinators, Al Golden, defensive coordinator, I'd love to give him a hug and tell him thank you, but I can't wait. I cannot wait. Thursday, the Orange Bowl. From Miami, Notre Dame, Penn State. Riley Leonard has yet to throw a consequential pass in the fourth quarter on these playoffs. Does that matter?
You just jinxed it.
Are you picking Notre Dame?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's been an Ohio State Notre Dame collision course from the start.
Oh, my gosh. Eddie bleeping Garrison. I love you. I love all of our listeners. Thank you all. In all seriousness, I know the season has been up, down, crazy.
Back tomorrow.
Genuine thank you for your listenership and your care. It means the world. We'll be back mañana.